everyone, to a new episode of the Haptics Club podcast. I am Ashley, Strategic Partnerships at Titan Haptics, and I'm joined by my Haptics crew, Manu from Unity, Eric from Razer, and Brian from SenseGlove. The Haptics Club is a team of people that have a passion for haptics. Our goal is to raise awareness of the amazing tech and people happening in the haptic space, and of course to foster interesting discussions on the subject. Speaking of that, right now we are joined by Ben Lang, who's been reporting in XR for over a decade as co-founder and executive editor of Road to VR. It's a leading independent VR news publication. Of course, everyone knows what Road to VR is. Some of his haptics coverage includes stories like the 5 most interesting VR haptic technologies I've seen in the last 5 years. He's been quoted in Forbes, Ars Technica, seen him on Between Realities. We all know Ben, and we all want to grill him with amazing questions about all the haptics tech he's played with. There's so much to talk about, so we'll just divide the hour by, a 5-minute intro. We'll do area of expertise, and of course, we'll cover the future of haptics and challenges and opportunities of the haptics industry. We shut off the recording at some point, and we asked some of the really juicy questions. So of course, you're going to miss that because you're not a part of the audience. But of course, you can join us next time. Check out thehapticsclub.com. Sign up for a newsletter. Check out who's going to be our next guest, and that way you can RSVP and you won't miss it. And last but not least, we have to thank our sponsors like the Haptics Industry Forum. They're a haptics association, which is enabled to create streamlined haptic standards and adoption and foster collaboration and increase market awareness. So thanks to them for, filling our coffee cups, keeping our website running, and keeping this podcast going. Enough talk, enough intro. Let's get into talking with Ben. Super excited. Eric, I hand it to you.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Ashley. Great intro as usual. Ben, I think I met you again a few years ago on the floor of CES, I think 2017, something like that, at the beginning of haptics in VR, or at least what you see today as consumer haptics for VR. A little bit that is happening right now. But let's tell us something about yourself. Your passion for VR predates Oculus, if I remember correctly, right? Tell us a little bit your story regarding VR and how you came to found Road to VR.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. Haptics is, such a fascinating part of the VR space because we all want immersion, right? And what better way than to feel like you're actually touching the worlds around you? As far as my story goes, so I founded Road to VR in 2011, which was about a year before Oculus was founded, which for people who don't, know the history, haven't been this for a decade or more at this point. Oculus was the company that sort of reignited the passion for VR that was kind of sleeping. VR had been around in the 80s and 90s, but it never really penetrated the mainstream, and kind of went into hibernation from the mid 90s beyond, and didn't really exist in the consumer mind space at all until Oculus came along and, like I said, resparked this. Of course, there were lots of other companies, but really when Facebook paid billions for this random VR startup called Oculus, it was a big deal. Now it feels normal, to associate, Facebook or Meta with VR. But back then, when they paid billions of dollars for this VR startup, this is a social media company buying a VR startup, and the whole tech industry was like, "What is happening?" That story's played out over the last 10 years. I had been doing tech journalism prior to starting Road to VR, and I've been working for other people, kind of just gaining some experience as a youngster, and eventually cut my teeth enough that I felt like I knew what I was doing to report on technology. And I said to myself, why don't I try kind of doing something on my own, like something that I'm really passionate about? I wasn't covering anything like VR at the time. It was more like computers and tablets and smartphones. And really, Road to VR was just like a side project. It was just, why don't I start my own thing and write about something that I'm interested in? Because I had found that in spending all the time writing about the things I was writing about, I just learned so much about them. And I had an encyclopedic knowledge of the smartphones and the tablets of the era, the specs and the companies and all that. And I just had immersed myself in that industry and learned so much about it. So I was like, well, if I'm going to do something on my own, I should do something I'm interested in so that I learn a lot about something I'm interested in. So Road to VR, VR as a topic for the thing that I started writing about was really just it was just one of 10 things I had jotted down in a list of potential things. And for one reason or another, it won out in my brain as being the thing that I was most interested in learning about. Primarily, I think because this idea that we all know that dreams can be basically real to us, in the moment they feel completely real. That really made it interesting to me to think that if our brains can kind of induce a perfect, reality in our own heads, theoretically it should be possible in the far, far, far future that, if our brains can self-stimulate themselves to create those experiences in the far, far future, a la Matrix, we might be able to stimulate artificially into a kind of dream state to have like a perfect virtual reality. You can feel, you can hear, you can. Has anyone ever smelled in a dream? I don't know if I've ever smelled in a dream. We'll get there. But anyway, just long story short, this seemed like a really interesting idea to me, and I really wanted to know, like, if that might be possible, like how far are we from that? Like obviously it's at least hundreds of years, but I really wanted to know like where VR had gone, because when I started this, nothing was really happening. I want to know where it had gone and where it might go. Hence the road to VR was I wanted to kind of try to get a rough trajectory of where this stuff is going. Unbeknownst to me at the time, I didn't have any special insight. It was about a year later that Oculus was founded. They were this little startup. They raised a bunch of money, and from there, this whole VR community, we used to call it, started. And eventually, at some point, we stopped saying VR community and we started saying VR industry because it just kept growing and growing. And now it's this big thing with tons of products on the market and really exciting, awesome space to have been in. And I'm, so glad that I've been following the whole journey.
What I love what you're saying, because you talk about journey, and the name of your publication is Road to VR, and I like that because we will never arrive at the perfect.
Yeah.
Right. We will never be perfect, and maybe we will be better in many ways, but we'll never be perfect. So it will always be a journey to arrive there. The question is, does it even make sense to arrive there? And
I definitely have. Yeah, I have people who say, we're here, VR is here, and I'm like, no, when I started this, I was thinking from here to the Matrix. All right, so we're still so far away, and there's a lot more to cover. So we're still going to be on this road for long after I'm gone.
Yeah, fun stuff. By the way, you said that when you dream, you don't smell. It's because the area that gets activated while dreaming don't touch the smell area, as well as when you dream, you cannot read.
Really?
Because it doesn't. Yeah, there is a bunch of things going on, but that's it's normal that you don't smell.
I love that because I've never heard that. It makes a lot of sense, and I just learned something brand new that I'd never heard before. So that's fascinating. Like I said, I can't recall ever having a time in a dream where I smelled smoke or food, and wow, very, very interesting. Thank you.
Drinking beers with neuroscientists has these problems.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because that's one of the. Would you guys consider it haptics? Is smell haptics, or is it just like sensory?
Please don't enter here. We have in OpenXR this discussion with people that they think that haptics and smell should be the same. They shouldn't. I mean, haptics should be the touch mediated by technology. That should be like the accepted definition. As smell is mediated by chemicals. So they are two different pathways.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, haptics.
I
Where do
leave
you
it
guys
to
want to go?
Ashley, all yours.
You're gonna get Eric going on that. Oh, amazing!
Yours.
I love that. So jumping into area of expertise, I mentioned that article that you wrote about the most intriguing haptic experiences. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are the most accessible kind of like great haptic experiences that folks could try? Maybe there's like, if you'd only have to try one or can only try one, what would that experience be?
Ooh, that is a really good question. And there's a lot of different ways I think it could be answered. Unfortunately, off the top of my head, and this is a shame, I don't have one VR experience where it's like they did the best haptics, like it's obvious, which is really a bummer because if you really spend the time on it, and when I say, I mean, if the developers really spend the time on it and get it right, like it can add so much. And honestly, I'm kind of bummed that off the top of my head, I can't just point people to one experience where like they really nailed it and the haptics were obviously beneficial. However, one, it's not complicated, but one where haptics is extremely useful and I think underappreciated is actually Beat Saber, which is by all means probably the most popular VR game to date. Great game. And every time you hit a block, you're getting some haptic feedback. And I think that varies a little bit based on how well you hit it. You can get like, I think there's like, you can get a full kind of haptic effect, and you get like a sour haptic effect, like not as strong if you don't quite hit it. And then of course, if you miss it, you get nothing. That seems really obvious. Like, yeah, of course, just buzz the thing when you hit the thing. But it actually makes the game way more playable. And I love haptics the most when they contribute information to the user, not just immersion, but like information that you're not getting through another channel. So for instance, with Beat Saber, these blocks are flying by you so fast, and you're in this rhythm that you're not consciously looking at each block to tell if you successfully cut it. Maybe you can kind of see that when you look back at like, the playback footage, but when you're just in that flow state, by the time you have committed to swinging and where you're swinging, you're not looking to confirm the cut, right? But you feel it with the haptics. And when they're coming at you so fast, you don't have time to confirm every one, but you feel it. And when you miss one and you're going to the beat, right? And the haptics are going to the beat essentially too. And you're in this mode of patterns. And when you miss one and you like don't have that part of the beat that you were feeling, you know it immediately. And you're like, that's not right. I have to I've missed something important and I have to get back into that state. Because again, it's not like, okay, I'm going to cut that block. I'm going to cut that block. It is this continuous like mental flow state, and having that extra channel to tell you when you missed it rather than having to look and see that you missed it actually adds a lot. And I say it's kind of underappreciated because the haptics are always there and people are just like, yeah, whatever, it's obvious. If you turn the haptics off and try to play Beat Saber, you will immediately realize you're missing something huge. And so, yeah, it's not a complicated implementation, but it is an excellent implementation. It's very important to the gameplay.
I love that. And also for me, that one is an amazing example because when you put the sabers together, you have like a lightsaber kind of vibe happening.
Yeah.
You can also touch the floor. So it's like, yeah, those like little nuances make it very spectacular. Yeah. That's a great example.
And how about either of you? I mean, do any VR experiences come to mind that really stand out as having awesome haptic implementation?
My problem is that I see the defect instead of seeing the value.
Glass half empty.
Yeah.
But what I would like to say that what you said, Ben, you encapsulated the problem of the whole haptics market in basically one expression. It is when it's done well, you don't realize that it's there, and when it's not there, you realize that it's missing.
Yeah.
So it's actually you find a value just after it disappeared. So it's really difficult for communication and experiences to pick up this value and share it and show it to the user, and making a differentiating purchase experience or differentiating immersive experience. So that's the whole problem. It's really like you need to experience it and you need to realize how good is it, and you need to lose it to understand why it makes sense. And I think that's one of the biggest problems from the developer side. That's why they need to invest in haptics. But regarding the experiences, I mean, I tested the Haptics Club different iterations. Some of their interactions are amazing.
Yeah.
Some of them, not all of them, but some of them are wonderful. I lose the idea of the time in VR, and I'm touching the grass as in their basic demo. That's just amazing because it's so compelling that it makes me forget that I'm in VR and I'm interacting with the hands. But as a whole experience, I tend to agree with you. I didn't find anything that is perfect. Let's say it's encapsulating and makes a lot of sense as a whole. Let's put it in this way.
Yeah.
Ashley?
Yeah, I think for each game that I like it haptics with, there's like some inconsistencies with it where it's very noticeable. So it's like you can feel, say, like you're tapping a putter, which is great. But then there's like, if there's like phantom, like feels like phantom haptics or like haptics happening at like a strange time when you least expect it, or it doesn't really, it's not consistent. That's what kind of makes it a bit nuanced and troublesome. So yeah, I think there's some games that do really certain parts really well, but as a whole experience, yeah, it's tough. I don't know. Chicken and the egg.
Well, so this isn't an experience that anybody can go try because it's on like a $10,000 haptic glove. However,
Yeah.
one of the coolest demos I've ever tried was on the Haptics glove, which has not just essentially, you might call it tactile feedback, but it also has force feedback, which is the glove has the capability to restrict the movement of your fingers. Essentially, you can push back on your fingers. And they did this demo. They showed me a bunch of different stuff. But the one thing that absolutely blew me away, it sounds so stupid because it's so simple, but it was so compelling, was wearing these big gloves. And, you're in a VR headset, so you're not seeing the gloves. You just see your hands, reaching out and grabbing a like 2-inch by 2-inch cube and just grabbing it with my fingers on each, on the faces and rotating it like this. And the gloves are able to stop your fingers. And, like I said, I love haptics the most when they give you, information that's useful. It's not just a thing and a thing. It's like when you do that, that you have successfully the game, that the game knows that you're grabbing the cube. So to you, it's just you grabbed it, right? And so, you've got it. And then the ability to manipulate it, it actually, like in this case, it's not just creating an association between what you see and what you feel, like kind of a conceptual connection. In this case, it is actually forcing you to mimic the physical act of doing this, right? It's literally just this, because but with a lot of haptics, when you don't have force feedback, when you go to grab something, you're just grabbing through the air. And if you have to like mime like grabbing a mug, like stop your hands on your own from grasping that mug, it's feels goofy, and usually the game has a hard time detecting it, right? Because like, where is that exactly? But with force feedback, and in this case, done very well, there's none of that. You just squeeze like you would to grab something, and it stops your fingers naturally, and just felt amazing. Like I could swear that cube was a real object between my fingers as I was spinning it around. And I don't think I'll ever forget that. And again, it just seems so simple. Like, why is it important to feel like you can spin a cube? But it was such a perfect connection of a virtual object essentially interacting with my physical body, which is awesome. Like, it's not, you wouldn't even call it immersion. It's just kind of reality right there in front of you, which is wild.
That's awesome. Yeah. So if you have a chance to check it out, you should definitely check out the Haptics demo. I love like the spider walking across the hands, super enchanting.
Mm-hmm.
But for us regular humans who want, or, just won't be able to, PSVR 2 is a very accessible option. Just came out. I'd love to kind of get some of your thoughts on it. And then, you've now like watched the stream of Twitter, like all these people are getting this headset and you're seeing a bunch of feedback, or even from your friends. Like how's that been? What's going on with that?
Yeah, so I have to imagine everybody listening to this probably a nerd already, but if you're not specifically in the VR nerd space, a quick overview of why PSVR 2 is important for haptics is on the controllers, you have your traditional kind of rumble, probably linear actuator, the kind we all like now. But in addition to that, on the triggers, you have some force feedback. So exactly what I was talking about. The trigger can actually restrict the movement of your finger, which is kind of a new dimension of haptics, which we haven't had in any existing consumer VR headset. So if anybody has the PS5, it's very similar to the default PS5 controllers, where the triggers can vary how hard it is to push, and they can also push back and kind of do this dynamically. In addition to that, the headset actually also has a motor on it, which makes it kind of gives it a really low rumble, which no other headset, again on the market, especially in the consumer space, has done so far. And it's this additional channel, this additional space where developers can choose to sort of give you this a haptic signal. It's really cool, frankly, because they're just upping the game here, right? We've had the rumble in VR controllers for a long time. Some of them actually have pretty great, little motors in there that can do a lot of stuff. But giving these two new channels, both the triggers with force feedback and then kind of information on your head instead of just your hands, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's like more bandwidth for communicating to the user information out of the game. And I think that is awesome. I will say that, as we've been talking about, the unfortunate thing is, like, I have yet to see an absolute killer app for these new haptics. I'll say that the head rumble it's pretty straightforward. It kind of, as far as I know, you kind of just can rumble it, and that's about it. There's not a lot of variance to it. However, I did find that in sort of like when it's sparingly used and in big moments, like I was playing Horizon Call of the Mountain, and there's like a huge robotic machine that flies right close over your head, and it's very threatening, and that rumble, you're not expecting it because I don't use it all the time, which I think is the way to do it. When that happens, you're not exactly like, oh, my head's rumbling. You're like, wow, that thing just it just adds that emphasis to the moment, which I think is great. It, again, not complex, but just adds that little extra emphasis to what is happening, which I thought was really cool. The triggers, however, I'm still waiting for a game that is like really killing it. Because I'll say it again, I think the best, when haptics are at their best, they're communicating information to you that you're not getting otherwise. So far, that all I've seen is like you pick up one gun and the trigger might feel a certain way. You pick up another gun, it might feel a little bit of a different way. But I haven't stopped and been like, oh yeah, like I'm getting something from this, something specific. It's so far kind of just been used like maybe a little bit arbitrarily. Though I will say it feels like there's huge potential. So I'm really waiting for that moment, that game that's like, yeah, this is how it should be used, and other people should pay attention and do something similar. One other thing, and it's I guess it's kind of a nitpick at this point because these are nice new haptic channels. The PSVR 2 controller would have been like next level if the index trigger, like the gun trigger, is the one that has the force feedback, but the inner grab trigger does not. So the inner grab trigger is actually just a button on the PSVR 2 controller. And it works fine, but so much, maybe in some games 100%, and in other games 50% of your interactions with the virtual world are grabbing stuff, and usually that's done with the grab button. So it's unfortunate that the inner grab button or trigger does not have the same force feedback capabilities as the main trigger. So it's kind of like developers are going to have to pick and choose. If we want to be able to give that haptic information, we're going to have them use the trigger rather than the grab button, if you will. So that will complicate, I think, things a little bit. If it was just on both, it would probably be, I think, easier for developers to use it more often, because they could use it every time. Like every interaction is going to be a trigger or a grab button for the most part in VR, except for select cases. So had it been on both, it would have been like, yes, like absolutely next gen controller. It's close, but because it's only on one, so close.
And how would you compare your experience between these Sense controllers, which are DualSense for VR, fun DualSense because it's two handsets, whatever, compared to the Oculus Quest Pro, which have an LRA under the trigger? It has actually two actuators under the fingers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're just going to bump into this problem a lot. The haptics are there. I have not seen a killer use case for them. So the Quest Pro controllers are awesome. They have their own inside-out tracking. You don't need to keep them in space of the camera. That's so cool. And they do have upgraded haptics. They have a really nice weight to them. The haptics feel powerful, and they have it in the trigger. They have it in the handle. I did one early demo of that Meta had put us through that was specifically haptics, and it was like touch a bunch of stuff, you could rub on different surfaces, and all of it came through really, really nicely. But they never put that demo out, which really bums me out. I don't even think it's out for developers. And it was like it was just designed to show off the haptics. It was kind of like a little playground for your hands. And I really wish they would put that out, because when you guys asked me earlier, what's the thing people can try? It's like, if you had a Quest Pro, I'd point you there, because you can see the real incredible range of capabilities that the haptics are capable of. But it just isn't. Haptics just seem in this perpetually weird place where they are an afterthought, even after audio, which tends to be the afterthought after visuals and game design, which is a bummer to just see. It's so rare for it to really get the attention it deserves, which blows my mind, because it can be not just more immersive, as we talked about, but it can be useful. It can be useful to help the user understand what they're doing in the game. We see this a lot in VR games where, if you need to reach over your controller to grab something, Like a lot of games will do this over the shoulder holster kind of thing where you reach over, pull the trigger. When you bring your hand forward, you've got your gun or whatever. For a long time, a lot of games will just expect you to just know exactly where that zone is, but eventually, smart developers paying attention are putting haptic, zone back there. So when you reach back, you're getting that buzz to know you're in the right spot. Again, communicating information to you that you can't see and can't get another way. Then when you grab, you are confident that you have it. And actually, an interest that brings us kind of back to those the PlayStation controllers with the trigger, right? Same deal. If you reach back there and you pull your trigger to grab whatever's back there, and it just pulls easily, like nothing's in your hand, you didn't grab it. If you reach back there and you can use it to kind of give you some force feedback, now you kind of have the sensation that you have successfully grabbed something. So not only does that like make the user more like able to play the game better, adds immersion, like makes the developer's job easier of making the whole basically in-game interface and holster system better. Like it's all there, and all it is like just being cognizant about haptics are not just for immersion. They are also for it is a communication channel between the player, and often a very intuitive one if you are smart and careful about how you do it, which is it's as subtle as in game design when you need to light up a door in the room so that it catches the player's eye. But we all agree that's incredibly important, right? And very useful to the game design and communicating to the user.
Thanks, Ben. Maybe you are in the stream of consciousness here. Let me continue. What about we talk about main platforms, haptics, right? What about peripherals? There are a bunch of companies that are developing haptics peripherals, and with all the problems regarding integration, APIs, developer relationship, all these kind of things that maybe will be solved one day with OpenXR, but right now are a challenge for this company actually to grow a sustainable business. But what can you tell us? What you probably tested most of them. What are some compelling use cases, compelling form factor that you would like to shout out to say, oh, this makes sense for this thing, this makes sense for that things?
As you mentioned, that is kind of the big challenge, right? The whole integration problem and cost and all of that. If we're purely talking about the technology and not thinking at all about actually getting it in there, a very neat system that I saw years ago was a pneumatic bladder system. So imagine the Vive wands, imagine like let's say a baseball bat handle, but it is wrapped in this bladder, this rubber thing that can fill with air that's segmented like in rings and sections. And then there is a pump that can pump up those sections in not just all at once, like you're inflating a balloon, but each section independently. So as you're gripping this thing, you can actually feel the bladder kind of expand against your hand. It is sort of a form of force feedback. It is it's not rumble. It is more of a pressure sensation. So alone, that would be neat. Might help you understand that when you're grabbing something versus not. If you can imagine this on a VR controller as it was when I demoed it. But the ability for them to inflate the different bladders in patterns, like could give really interesting sensations. So like I think a silly but clear one is like imagine you're holding like a virtual fire hose, right? And they're inflating the bladders in sequence to make you feel like, yeah, there's water like flowing through this hose and coming out of it. Obviously that's not what you'd feel in real life, but it is communicating to the user that this thing is happening. So that I thought was extremely cool. There's definitely, it sounds a little niche, but I think I was pretty impressed actually with all the different effects that they had and how they could be used. They could even do it for things like if you're pulling back a slingshot, communicating the amount of tension in the slingshot or let's say bow by inflating that bladder more and more and more. Again, it's like it's not exactly what it would feel like in real life, but you are making this association between what you see and what you feel, and it's giving you an intuitive sense for how stretched is this thing. So really lots of cool opportunities for that. If somehow that could be like consumerized and made very manufacturable and cost affordable and reliable, which is all the challenges of making technology happen, it would be awesome to have those on the entire handle of every controller. That's such a wide surface, and your hands are just absolutely packed with nerves, which is why we tend to, your palms and fingers specifically, why we tend to do haptics on the hands. That's like such a high bandwidth channel, if you will. It would be great to be able to utilize just all of that extra surface for, being able to push something against. Just lots of extra opportunities there to do cool stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm super bullish on a pneumatic. I'm just trying to understand how we can bring it to market in any way or form. But because it's, I mean, from a haptics perspective, it's a nice little property that is compliant. And being compliant, it's sort of one of flip side problem of haptics, which is 4 factors. And the other way around is that you can do low frequency and relatively high frequency. You can get pneumatic up to 150, 200 hertz. And basically you can substitute completely a Weber tactile system. You could do low frequency and high frequency with the same system. Yeah, I agree. I mean, technology is relatively mature on the pump side. The problem from our perspective is the noise. It's noisy. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, right now at this stage. It's not even energy consumption, that's easy, but it's really about noise. So, but I'm bullish. I think that something will happen in the next 5 years, hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. It's tempting for me to want that as well. However, I feel like if we could just direct the energy toward making the existing haptics, really, really well utilized, I think we would love it. And maybe they'd be so good that we would want, more people be encouraged and see the importance of bringing even better haptic technology into these devices.
In terms of, I want to jump into kind of like the side of marketing and promotion, because I think you've probably heard like many pitches and you've seen how people are, promoting, advertising their products. Tell us a little bit about like what you've seen over time, kind of since the beginning of how people have been talking about haptics and what you're seeing now.
It's a good question. I would say early on in the VR space, everybody was trying everything and it was really exciting. There are lots and lots of haptic technologies that I've seen that are so cool and demo so well, just like this pneumatic one, but they really don't have a realistic path to adoption, or they don't. Well, yeah, they don't have a realistic path to adoption either because the technology just won't work, or because they require too much from the user. So on the one hand, you've got the noise issue and miniaturization of pneumatics to try to get that into a consumer size device is problematic. But then on the other hand, you can have these Haptics gloves, even if they were $200. Even if they were $50, if you ask the users to put those on every single time that they want to do something, it's a huge ask, right? Yeah, you already have to, well, at least in VR land, you already have to put on the headset and pick up the controllers. If you have to put these big gloves on and make sure they fit, and then you have to take them off if you want to use your smartphone stuff, it's just completely unrealistic. And consumer isn't the only space, right? There are reasons to use haptics elsewhere for training and such, but even there, it is really important to have a high usability. Like, especially if you have something that has to go in your hands that prevents you from using your smartphone. Like, I know that sounds almost petty, but these, our smartphones are insanely valuable tools that all of us use every single day of our lives at this point. To cut people off from that because they're wearing something is problematic. And right, this goes for just putting on a VR headset, right? Even that is, you're asking people to sort of leave this important tool behind for the time being, which can be nice if you want it, but if you need to still be in touch, that's a problem. So yeah, I think over time, the industry has started to realize that if it's not like simple and cheap, the odds of success are just really low. The smell stuff, right? Not exactly haptics, but one good example, I've seen 15 different companies saying we've got the best smell system in terms of how it smells and our ability to trigger it, but it's always this big, bulky, unrealistic thing that would need to be like refilled by the user and things like that. And it's just like no manufacturer of a headset is going to realistically want to put that in their product, which is a shame. It'd be so cool if all this stuff was just incredibly easy to use, but you really have to pick your battles in terms of cost and complexity when it comes to haptics, because consumers aren't going to accept a lot of friction, and manufacturers are not going to accept a lot of complexity or cost or size.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you resumed in 10 minutes all the findings of our podcast in the last 2 years, more or less. Yeah, but no, yeah, yes, it's. I mean, we completely agree. And there was the episode with Chris Ulrich, who was the CTO of Immersion, said it will be really, really hard to beat vibrations because they are cheap, they are reliable, they are small, and they are powerful. And you need to check these boxes. If you don't check these boxes, you are not going to make it. And I am so bullish on the fact that DualSense allowed to bring another type of stimulation, which is force feedback, in a consumer product. And that is unheard of. I mean, it's the first time that happens actually in haptics. All the last time they failed. And this is, I think, two innovation, wideband haptics and force feedback, which was, I think, which speaks about on the amount of care that Sony to put into this kind of user interfaces and bring them to the market. So kudos to them on this one. And that's why I'm so bullish on PSVR 2. And when they announced head haptics, I said, oh, this will be fun.
Yeah, you're right. I think I agree that there are, props to be given to Sony for a company to, one of the biggest console manufacturers in the world that's got a controller that's very widely loved, to say like that's not enough, and to figure out what they can give the consumers who aren't even asking for it. I don't think there were a lot of their average console gamers or their average customers out there who were saying like, this would just be a much better product with force feedback triggers, right? It wasn't exactly an obvious thing if you weren't grabbing the controller, looking at it, feeling how it works, and saying like, what can we do to make this more immersive? And it's interesting that extra immersion even applies just on the DualSense controller, because it's it's not VR, but again, just kind of feeling like your hands are a little more connected to the game ends up mattering a lot. Again, it's that the surface is just really important for us as humans. So yeah, that is really awesome. And I hope that it becomes the standard. I think they've proven that it's one of those things that after you play games with it that use it relatively well, you don't want to go back to not having it. It feels like you're missing something. That is sort of the essence of knowing that they've added something that is critical. So I hope that your Xbox and your Nintendo will follow suit. As far as I know, Nintendo is kind of the furthest behind in terms of the haptics on their controllers, unfortunately. But they like simplicity more than anybody else, and low cost. So fair. But yeah, I hate to be down on haptics like that. I'm sure you guys understand. It's because we understand the potential of it, and we want to see it utilized as much as it can be, especially with the hardware that's already in these controllers, right? We're talking a lot about new stuff and new, what could the future be? The stuff that's already in there can do so much that I would just love to see that happen first and foremost. And Eric, to that end, I think, we've talked about authoring being a huge challenge. It's not that people don't want to do it; it's that it's difficult. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your work in trying to address that.
So I will keep it brief and short and sweet because this is your podcast. No, the problem is there's two problems there to our understanding. One, it's unclear what does it mean to do a good haptics in a sense of design guidelines. It means like being deliberate on what you are going to do. And this is first problem. And this is part of this podcast to address this problem, but there are a lot of other, also in Haptic Industry Forum, we're going to address this problem on how do you need to think to create a fantastic haptics experience? Why God of War is fantastic, Hogwarts is not. It's not the implementation, it's how it's designed from a conceptual point of view. And then there are implementation problems. The implementation problems is that all the haptics devices right now have separate APIs. That means that the developer needs to reinvest every time to create that, and that's really expensive for an unclear ROI, which means that a games producer simply doesn't allocate resources for that because it's unclear, because it doesn't bring. Can I make money on this one? There is a differentiating experience of the user that allows me to say, okay, I put 2-3 developers on this one, and the problem is that for every platform they need to redevelop that. Which means that they have an extra cost on top of that. So these are, I think, the two key problems. And the second problem, we are solving it with Interaptics, which is the platform that we are building, and the various API and standardization. The first problem of the being deliberate on how you design haptics, that is a lot of documentation, a lot of work regarding sharing best practices. And this podcast and the Haptic Industry Forum want to address this problem. So for me, these are the two key things.
Well, so let me ask you, because I'm curious, and so with, I think one of the biggest challenges is authoring effects that are really unique and interesting and fit, a piece of gameplay. Is there widespread sharing of different haptic effects? If somebody says, like, I just nailed how a machine gun should feel, here is that as a file. Like, are people sharing those? Is there a library?
No.
Do you think there should be?
There should be examples that you can take inspiration from and guidelines that you should use for. But specifically, haptics is so tied with audio, specifically for this kind of interactions, where that if you change a little bit the machine gun, you change the repetition of the machine gun, you need to change your haptics effect. So that it's better to create procedural models from audio patterns to create haptics than to say, oh, this is a good machine gun, because the machine gun makes sense only when there is the sound. In this case, if you grab something, that have nothing to do with sound, has to do with visuals. Basically, haptics has these two dualities. In one case is audio-based, which is fast-paced explosions. In other case is visual-based. In the case of visual, I think we can create libraries, pretty much, because it's a static system and you interact with that. In the case of audio, it will be a bit more difficult, but you can share best practices and automate the system. It's the thing that you.
Yeah, and I would love to see that, and hopefully that becomes more common if people are starting to use a common tool set, especially across devices. Because I do see really awesome, you'll see games where you can tell they made an interesting effort to create a particular haptic feeling, and it works really well. Sometimes though, it works really well because usually actually because it is specifically tuned for that controller. And I know one of the big issues is you might say, well, let's just have a haptic buzz on every Beat Saber hit, for instance. But if you are not actually customizing that for every controller, because every controller has, just different motors and different capabilities, it won't feel the same. It's not like, well, we'll just, we have the Switch version of the game and the PC version, the Xbox version. We just put the sound, and the sound's going to play effectively the same. There's better audio hardware or not, but it's when it comes to haptics, it can be so different that your haptic effect you put in there almost isn't even doing its job if it's not on the right controller. So I've actually always been really curious about translating the sort of, like, if you have a Quest 2 controller, for instance, and you create a haptic effect and you're happy with it, translating that to another controller without specifically having to go in and tweak it, is that like possible? Like for Interaptics, for instance, are you doing any work to help to do that translation where you are sort of automatically adjusting what the developer says they want, so that when it goes to another controller, you've changed it in whatever way it needs to be changed?
So we have all the translation, mechanical and perceptual translation model. Yes, we have a good example. DualSense has a reference frequency at 60, start from 20 Hz till, let's say, good is 100. Above that is useless. iPhone is 6300. We have a frequency remapping system because it's not a WAV file, it's parametric. A frequency remapping system on the system, and we have a resonance frequency compensation, which comes back in the way that the design intention is transported. There is a ERM, you have a translation model. So the reason why which we work so slow, we are so slow. Every time we add a platform, we need to build a translation model for these kind of things and nail it. When it's nailed, it's done, and we're not going to touch it. But that was the longest part of our work, was to build this abstraction layer for representing the effect, which is not a wave, and being able to translate it. That is our core value proposition, by the way.
Awesome. Is that fundamentally new to do this sort of automatic translation? Are there tools that have done this before?
Never heard about that anything before, to my experience. Otherwise, we would have use it. Let's say.
Well, that to me sounds like a just massive benefit. You don't have to, if you don't have to have and touch and feel every controller and say, is it how I want it? Is it how I want it? Is it how I want it? I mean, that's massive, gain in productivity. So from your end though, is it when you for Inner Haptics are trying to create those translations? Sorry, this is my inner reporter coming out and my curiosity.
You're taking over the interview with your questions.
Well, yeah,
you cannot stop to be a journalist.
When you are creating those translations, you get a new device and you say, we need to make sure that everything maps to this in a way that feels correct per its capabilities. Is that like a manual process of you holding the controller and trying different models and tweaking it until it's just right?
So we have a quantitative approach, which is based on a high bandwidth accelerometer and or sensors that allows us to map the capability of the system first. This is one. And the second point is that then you can't really get rid of the human if you would like that. And then it's like Camille said from Apple, it's the golden finger. So you have a bunch of people that are really trained about these things and really you feel it. Example, when you're really trained, you can feel a mismatch from audio to haptics of 1 millisecond, a normal person 30, 40. Mm-hmm. So you really develop a feeling for that. And basically then you refine it by hand. Mm-hmm. And let's say probably from future Razer product, you will feel my take on these things.
Yeah.
Because I'm the one that, tunes things up. And in Apple, you feel Camille take. He's the guy who refines the Apple feeling. And it's pretty much like audio, like different sound systems have different marking, frequency patterns, but it's usually the founder who tuned it in that way because his feeling is pretty much the same. So it's still a lot of analog work.
Yeah. Well, that's very fascinating to me.
Oh, thanks for the question. It was the first time that anybody asked this, and it's a wonderful question. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, let's go to the future. Let's go to the future.
Yeah, I'm like super can't wait to ask this, Ben, because we've been talking about like what kind of like challenges there have been in the industry, some of the cool stuff that you've seen that you kind of hope is going to come out. What do you hope that the future of haptics is going to look like in, say, like the next 5 to 10 years?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I guess we talked about it a little bit. I think the force feedback triggers is so widespread, or its applicability is extremely widespread. So, it can be on every game console. It can be in every VR controller. As far as we've seen, I mean, I don't know any of the inner details, but it seems like Sony is very happy with the reliability and cost and performance of whichever solutions they're using because they're throwing them in their controllers, right? So it's probably they're not paying too much. They're probably not seeing too much breakage. It feels like a mature technology, at least as far as Sony is rolling it out. So I would love to see the force feedback triggers, and like I said, having it both on a VR controller, having it both on the index trigger and the grab trigger would be that next level thing, because then, as I said, developers can always be using that channel no matter if the user is shooting a gun with the index trigger or activating something else or grabbing an object or various things with the grab trigger. That would be awesome. As far as further 10 years down the road, maybe it doesn't have to be that far either. I think the head haptics are a win too. Assuming that's a big challenge though, because if you think about it, anytime you're adding you need to rumble something that big, you need to add a lot of mass, right? And for a VR headset, you really don't want to add more weight. So I think that's going to be a challenge to find that balance of, is it being utilized enough to really warrant having this extra mass in there? But I do think overall it is a win in terms of having this new channel, right? We've never been able to do this before because if you think about traditional gaming, there's just not something on your head to shake, right? But since every VR player already has a headset on their head, that's a great place to have some new level of haptics. And yes, for those not on the video, Eric's pointing to his headphones, which yes, could be done, but not every gamer wears one. But yeah, that would be a great thing too. And in fact, I've always really wanted to see haptics in mice. I'm really surprised that hasn't happened yet. And Eric is shaking his head
Never, will
vehemently.
never, ever happen. Ever.
Let's hear it. Why not?
Because you're shaking the aim of the people.
Uh-huh.
And tests have been run, and FPS player hates it.
I mean, in theory, that makes a lot of sense, but you don't think that you can get you don't think that you can have a subtle enough rumble that would not shake the aim even when the user is holding the mouse firmly?
No, we have to go with reported haptics here, somewhere else. I mean, if it is immersive haptics that you're moving something, that is probably not going to happen. If you're looking at, let's say, taking out the click button and putting a haptics actuator, or we launched the adaptive scroll with haptics, that might be done because it's static interaction. But active haptics in the mouse, you're taking away the reason by which people want to 8 kilohertz pooling, right? Because basically you're making their aim really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
But it should be reported somewhere else.
Yeah, I have to say I'm with Ben. I think there's some potential, and maybe just not with pro gaming. But I want to get back to the future question, Ben, because I think I'm not going to let you off the hook on this one, because you said you use the Matrix as a benchmark. So what the heck does that look like? What does that future look like? That where Ben would be like, okay, we're good. Like this is where it's at. If, like check it out.
Yeah, we're going way far out there. Yeah. In the Matrix, it's total sensory. It is stimulating your brain, giving it all the artificial signals, essentially intercepting all of the signals that would be coming into it from your sensors, right? Your fingers, your eyes, your tongue, and all that. It is, in the Matrix, they're intercepting those signals and replacing them with artificial signals, which allows them to create a whole reality around you, what you see, what you feel, what you smell. So yeah, if we're going all the way there, it would have to be essentially like total body control. And we know, and when I say total body control, I mean total body sensation, if you will. Anything that's touched on your body, you could feel. And we know that is possible, in theory at least, because again, in dreams, you can touch and feel things in your dreams. So it should be possible to artificially create those sensations, many years down the road, once we have much better understanding of the brain and how that all works. In the near term, the near future, not the insane far future, the closest thing we have to that is something like the haptic vests or the haptic suits, which I think are really cool, and they can work in certain contexts. They obviously aren't going to be something people use in the home. However, there is this whole out-of-home VR space where people put on a headset and put on a vest and essentially run around like a warehouse-sized space. And that's the place to do it, because people already have to suit up, right? There's already the kind of onboarding experience of getting the headset on people and giving them whatever equipment they need. And so to put on a vest is not too much more in that situation, especially when it's like a made for this, when the haptics are like specially made for this VR experience and this vest people are gonna be wearing, that can be really cool. I hope that continues to exist, and only gets better. I have seen people suggest that in the I don't know, at some point in the future, there, we could have lightweight haptics kind of sewn into clothing, which I think is a really interesting idea. So, right now we have haptics in our clothes, usually in the form of our smartphone, right? We have it in our pocket and it buzzes, but if it's not in your pocket and you only have it on buzz, you might not hear it. I think it'd be really interesting to, if your shirt or whatever had a tiny little module in it that could stay sort of passively charged from movement or something like that, to be able to buzz to give you information either from your phone or something else. That might be really neat. The wristwatch, the smartwatches are essentially the first step toward that. And then after it closed, maybe we just, why not just embed it in our body, right? No, it's all very fascinating because, now we're talking about sort of the beginning of like cyborgism, right? Directly integrating machine and human, which is incredibly interesting to me also on the AR front, because if you leave your house without your smartphone, you're like, I'm naked, like I don't have this thing. Well, once AR glasses are a big important part of our lives, that sensation is going to be so much further off the charts. If you walk out of your house without your AR glasses, it would be like, I don't have my eyes on, you know what I mean? So all of this stuff is really interesting, and maybe we'll have nice haptics on the head too, on the AR glasses in the future.
Yeah. Awesome, Ben. Thanks so much for that. We'll definitely have to bring you back, because I think there's a whole plethora of stuff we could jam on that front. And I think that there's probably some banter we could have just with our differing opinions, even on that last topic. I know Eric's ready to go. But this is kind of the closing part. We do want to leave you with, if a minute to just maybe give like a piece of advice or like, and also just where people can find you and learn more about what you're up to.
Sure. I'm not a developer, so half of what I say is probably just completely ignorant of the realities of, game development, which is what I see a lot because a big part of my job is essentially doing analysis and critique of VR games. But I will say that in VR land, audio and by extension haptics are sort of the lowest performance cost way to add immersion to your games. So we have a lot of VR games that come out that look quite nice, but the audio sort of doesn't hold its end of the job up. I'm like really blown away when I see trailers come out. And again, these are indie studios, small projects. I'm not ignorant to the fact of why this is this is the case, but it almost upsets me knowing that with a little bit more resource allocation onto the audio side, that some of these games would just feel so much better, right? That's like audio and haptics go quite hand in hand because it is about the feel. And so if you are a VR developer who is struggling to hit your performance targets, but you feel like your game isn't quite hitting that immersive feel that you want, audio and haptics essentially cost nothing performance-wise in terms of their quality. So if you can spend a little more time, maybe bring on an expert or somebody who really knows their way around this stuff, it can go really, really far, maybe farther than you think, in terms of making your game look and feel, or not look, well, kind of look, honestly. When you pair a sound effect with a visual effect and a haptic effect, it all a feel, right? And it can feel so much better when it's not just a good visual, but also the rest of it. So yeah, that might be the advice. Think about your audio and how a little bit of polish there can go a long way and cost you almost nothing in terms of your VR performance budget.
Awesome. Great advice. And definitely check out Road to VR. Tons of epic content. You guys capture all the latest tech that's coming out. It's interesting insights on the industry. So thanks so much, Ben, for joining us. This has been an awesome conversation on gaming, XR, future of haptics. Also, special thanks to our sponsor, Haptics Industry Forum, hapticsif.org, haptics association that's created to basically streamline haptic standards and adoption. And for anyone listening, check out thehapticsclub.com. Follow us on LinkedIn. Catch us on Twitter. We have every episode live on YouTube, and we're on every podcast platform. So whether you're Apple or Spotify, you can find us there. So see you in the next episode.